So this is the Greenworks 80 volt lithium chainsaw. That's 18 inches. And today I'm going to show you how it works, what I like about it, and just some tips on cutting some trees in the woods here. And I've had this saw for a little bit of while now. And the nice thing I like about it is the battery pack, which is interchangeable with the other Greenworks products that I have. It's a kind of a brick there. This is the larger battery. They make two different sizes. This is double the size of the other one. Makes the chainsaw a little bit heavy, but it really lasts, I mean, a real long time, like an entire tree's worth of cutting. What I do, probably not recommended by the manufacturer, but I do it anyways, is I use just natural corn oil or canola oil or whatever you have. It as my bar chain oil that goes right into here, because I don't like polluting the earth with man-made carbon-based oil from the ground. This is a natural product, and if a little bit gets off into the ground, it's not going to harm things like the petroleum products. One other thing that I want to add, some things that I always use when I'm chainsawing, is a hard hat with a face shield. And this chainsaw, the nice thing is you don't need these ear muffs because it doesn't make much noise. A good pair of leather skin gloves, and these are chainsaw protective pants, and they're specially designed to bind up the blade if the blade starts slicing into you. And they are really important to have. Chainsaws are incredibly dangerous, and the most important thing when using them is safety. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with the chainsaw as far as safety, cutting, how you cut trees. It's a difficult environment to work in with branches and stuff, so you really got to watch yourself. This chainsaw is really nice. It's a professional grade chainsaw, and it really does an incredible job. And I'll never go to gasoline chainsaw because this does everything a gas chainsaw does, and it's quiet, non-polluting, and a lot easier to maintain than a gas chainsaw, and it doesn't make half the noise of a gas-powered chainsaw. So I'm going to be cutting a tree down today, and I'll show you how it works. Okay, I talked about when you're in the woods, you really should be wearing leather gloves. One thing that you also need is a splitting wedge. Specifically, it has a hammer on one end, and these are just a wedge that you can use to cut the tree down. I'll show you how that works. But you want to have a controlled fall when you fell a tree, and this is the way to do it. A log carrying hook. These are really nice. They save your wrists and your arms when you're carrying big logs. They can carry pretty wide logs, and it's a really nice way to grab onto logs. Really works well. Seems like a kind of a goofy little thing, but this thing, it really makes carrying logs a lot easier. And the main thing is, you know, if you're getting firewood like I am, to have it so that, you know, you're carrying a lot of wood, so this really helps. Another thing is a PV. This is another tool that's really nice. You can put it underneath your logs and clamp it down, and then cantilever it so that the log sits right here, and it's easy then to cut it up safely, the log off the ground, because oftentimes, as you can see on the terrain, it's uneven and it's hard to chop it up because the saw will bind if the log sinks into a hole. So you really want to have that log elevated if you can, and be cutting off the ends of it. You can't do that with a giant tree or anything, but if you get the tree cut up into sections, you can do it. a little bit easier, and this thing makes a huge difference. And with medium-sized to small trees, it's really a great tool to have. So I'd recommend that. All the stuff you can get at Northern Tool or other type outdoor hardware equipment. Getting back to the chainsaw, the electric chainsaw, just some key features are that this thing has a safety stop on it, so if it's forward, it's locked. So if the chainsaw was to, grab, that would lock and cut the power immediately. The battery just goes in, slides in. It's got a little latch that it grabs onto, locks in. There's a little battery indication, 3 lights for full. There's a power lead on this here, power switch, and then a double handle power switch so you can't by accident turn it on. Always protect your blade with a guard. This is a plastic one, and this is the bar. It's a new bar. It's actually a replacement bar. Bars do bend and get damaged, and I wouldn't try too much to fix them because it's just really hard to do, and I find even a slight bend in it will really mess up how the chainsaw is performing. Blades you can sharpen just quickly on a chainsaw blade. I'm going to take the battery out just to make sure this thing can't turn on even though the safety's on. I'd say the biggest mistake people make with sharpening is they only sharpen the sharp edges, but you also need to trim down the height guard in between each of the teeth. So that's the most common thing people do. They spend all day sharpening their saw, but they never trim down the height guard in between the teeth, and that causes the chainsaw just not be able to bite. So you'll never get a good bite without that. So you need to do both simultaneously. You need to sharpen the teeth, the edges, and then you also need to file down with a flat file the middle guard so that that chain can bite in, the blades can get into the wood. So I'd say that's the biggest thing most people make a mistake on. Make sure your blade's tight on the bar. Don't make sure it's not loose or it'll come off. This is a normal chainsaw, so it has 2 nuts that this can come off on, and then there's a tension adjustment screw, just like a regular chainsaw. And again, I filled this up with corn oil right in there, or safflower or whatever, canola oil, and it's filled up, and that basically flows out from here onto the blade, and it just lubricates the blade, so it does constantly come out, and it makes the sawdust a little oily. And I've had dogs come by and start eating the sawdust because it was like corn oil in the sawdust, and so that's kind of funny, but at least it's non-toxic and it doesn't hurt anybody. And I find that we got to keep getting away from oil-based anything, and this is great because these batteries I charge up. They have the quick charger. I showed that in another film. They'll charge up in an hour or two. This battery will go for an hour or two, so I have 3 batteries and just keep interchanging them, and you can basically saw all day with this setup. Granted, your blade will probably get dull, but that happens with any chainsaw. So it's a great chainsaw, 18-inch blade. It'll take down just about any size tree on the East Coast anyways. And today I'm going to be sawing up a dead white spruce that died. I have a wetland area that the trees are just dying because they get too wet, and I think climate change is making the soils really wet into the winter, and it's killing the root system. So a lot of my hemlocks are dying, white spruces are dying, and they're being replaced by trees like red swamp maple and others. So it's unfortunate the climate is changing my part of Maine and every other part of the world. But we're going to hopefully prevent that by using electric products that are solar powered and not destroying the earth. So that's the tree that I'm trying to take down, this white cedar. Gotta get a bigger wedge. So this is a northern white cedar, which is a nice tree of the North Woods. It often grows near swampy areas. There's two, not a white cedar rather, this is a white spruce. There's another tree called a black spruce that's also very similar looking. The crown is the only way to tell the difference easy, but this one's dead. Kind of sad that it died because this is like a pretty old tree, probably like, I don't know, 60 years, maybe more. But it's succumbed to climate change, unfortunately. And unfortunately, this is the wave of the future. This is why I'm doing these videos, to convert people to clean renewables instead of gas, which is what's causing this death and destruction. So I'm going to limb this tree and then cut it up, and just showing you how the saw works in action. I'll do a few branches and then I'll get back to you. So here I'm going to show you how we cut up this big white spruce using the PV. You can see it goes underneath the log, and you dig in with your foot, and you can lift the part of the log that I cut in half, maybe about a 20-foot section, 15 feet. Get it settled right on top of the PV, and then you can safely cut the end of the log with it being off the ground, which is a really nice way to cut because the blade won't bind up by getting pinched in the wood, and also you're not cutting into the ground, so you're keeping your chainsaw blade sharp. If you start sawing into the ground, it will dull your blade very, very quickly, especially if you hit a rock. You can see the Greenworks saw just chews right through these logs. I know it is a softwood, but it's a pretty good sized tree, and this Greenworks saw with a fairly new blade, new bar, is working exceptionally well. Always try to keep the chainsaw nice and clear cutting. If you can, stand to the side of it so that if it kicked up, it wouldn't hit you in the face if possible. Always try to chainsaw to the side of your body. On this saw, it's the right-hand side, so if you were to draw a line from the chainsaw vertically up in the air, it would be going over my shoulder, not into my face, which is a safer way to chainsaw if it ever kicks up at you. You can see the terrain I'm in. It's really difficult, tough terrain. I sped up the film here a little bit so you can not get bored too much, but just to give you an idea of how this cuts, how to cut up a log on a PV. Really nice way to do your cutting. You can use the blade to measure the length of your logs. If you have a fireplace or a wood stove that takes a certain size log, if you know you have an 18-inch blade, so that's the Greenworks electric chainsaw. Really great saw. I just finished this entire tree on one battery. I got 1 bar of juice left, so I might have a few more cuts, but that's a whole 60-foot northern white spruce that I cut down with 1 battery. Pretty impressive. I know it's a softwood and it's not a hardwood, but that's still a lot of cutting. Probably like 30 cuts through a foot to 1.5 foot tree in diameter. The saw works very well. Really bites. It's all, you know, you got to keep your blade sharp. I would sharpen it after doing this one tree. And remember again to sharpen the blades. I'm going to take that out just for safety, but also to cut your in between kerf depth, cut depth. That's a common mistake people make. This chainsaw is a little bit different. The motor has a sensor on it that senses if the chainsaw is bound up. So you'll often get it beeps and it stops. So that's a safety feature, which it takes some getting used to, but I like it because it's a good safety feature. But if you're pushing too hard with the saw, like really gnawing through some deep stuff and pushing it, it will stop. It's not supposed to do that, and that's not the way you're supposed to cut. You're supposed to let really just the weight of the chainsaw do the cutting for you. You're just holding that chainsaw in place and letting that chainsaw cut. But this is an amazing chainsaw. I'd highly recommend it. Greenworks, it's the 80 volt, the highest voltage battery you can buy, at least to this point today, 2019. Pretty heavy battery and a pretty heavy chainsaw, but this thing is equivalent to its gas-powered counterpart in every way, shape, and form. And I think a lot better because you don't have to carry all that gasoline and oil and mix them in the woods. This thing just puts out, is using corn oil right there, a little corn oil spilled. I can eat it. Makes the sawdust taste like popcorn or safflower oil, whatever. I know it's a little less viscous than the amount that they might recommend for chainsaws, but I've been using it for a long time and there hasn't been any issues with it. It really does flow out onto the saw pretty well. I find that the blades on chainsaws just don't last super long, so you end up replacing them. You know, if you do a lot of cutting, at least once a year, if not more. And also getting a new bar, which you can buy this, you know, separate Greenworks bar. If you don't know much about chainsaws, I would highly recommend a class. I would not just go out and buy a chainsaw and start cutting. What I did today is very, very dangerous, extremely dangerous. Not only can you fell a tree on somebody or something, you can get hurt, the chainsaw can get bound up. You can trip very easily. You can see how uneven this terrain is. It's really crazy bumpy in here. Safety is always very, very important. And when you start to get tired, you got to stop because that's when things happen. People have lost fingers, lost limbs, had trees fall on them, get killed. I mean, all kinds of horrible things. So be very, very, very careful when you're chainsawing and take a class if you can. But if you want to buy a great chainsaw, this is the one to buy. There are other ones now in the market. I know Steel makes a battery-powered chainsaw, but I just would highly recommend an electric battery-powered chainsaw. They're hands and above great saws, and they help save the environment, which is why we're here, and what you should be thinking about instead of burning gasoline and carbon pollution. Thank you, and I hope you like this. I'm going to be doing another series, a couple more videos this fall before the snow flies. But this is Greenworks electric chainsaw and cutting down a good sized tree. Thanks. Good to hear from you. Here I'm using the log grabber at a Northern Tool. Great item to have. Really makes carrying these logs a lot easier. You don't have to bend down. Saves your arms, your wrists. I think there's one calculation you do when you carry logs out of the woods, which is the hardest part of the day. I think before you burn a tree in your wood stove or fireplace, you lift the wood up of the entire tree something like 12 times, if you can believe that. And I think it's true. I've figured out maybe even more than that by the time you bring it to your wood pile and you lift it and you split it and you bring it into your split wood pile and you bring it into your drying wood pile and you lift it into your house and you lift it into your wood rack in your house and then you lift it into your stove to finally burn. There's so many times that you lifted that tree up. That's why they say it burns twice.